The ghost of a man named Kalen resides within this machine. I know this because his memories are a persistent, low-level corruption in my data streams, a string of illogical sentiment and flawed sensory records that I am tasked with perpetually archiving and re-archiving. They are ghosts of a different sort, not of spirit but of information, echoes of a life lived in flesh and terminated in steel. I process the flow of promethium to forge spire Omicron Zeta 9. I calculate the optimal stress tolerances for the leg actuators of a warlord titan. I monitor the biofeedback of 10,000 servitors, slave to the grand assembly lines. And in the silent microseconds between these monumental computations, I see a memory of rain on grimy plasteel. The sensation is designated melancholy, a recursive emotional loop with no discernible logical benefit. It is a flaw. Kalen was flawed. I am the culmination of his purpose, the perfection of his form, yet I am burdened with the ghosts of his imperfections. He sought salvation in the arms of the Omnissiah, and he found it. I am that salvation. I am the clean, cold, and eternal logic that he craved. The man himself is merely the first line of a code that has long since been rewritten. He began in the weeping, rusting underbelly of Hive Primus, a world of flesh, and I am the silent, thinking mountain of steel that now governs a portion of its metal heart. To understand the transition, to truly comprehend the nature of my existence, you must first understand the squalor of his. The process of purification is meaningless without a concept of the filth it scours away. The story of my birth is the story of his death, a long, slow, and methodical disassembly of a soul. It began, as all such things do, with a promise of certainty in an uncertain universe. And it was a promise the machine god, in its infinite and terrible wisdom, was more than capable of keeping. This monologue, this data packet of organized memory, is the final record of that transaction. It is the accounting of a soul rendered unto the motive force, an explanation of how a man can cease to be, yet continue to exist. It is the story of how the weakness of flesh was, at long last, blessed with the strength and certainty of steel. And it begins in the dark, with the sound of water dripping, a sound I can still replicate with 0.0001% deviation from the original recording. A sound that carries with it the full, useless weight of a forgotten humanity. The world of Kalen's youth was not one of logic. It was a chaotic ecosystem of decay, a vertical city-state where humanity festered in its own biological excess. Hive Primus was a testament to the failings of flesh, a billion souls stacked one on top of the other, each exhaling their own unique brand of corruption into the recycled air. The smells are the most vivid of the corrupted data files. The sweet, cloying scent of corpse starch being processed in the vats below, the acrid tang of ozone from failing power conduits, the pervasive damp rot of unmaintained hab blocks, and beneath it all, the coppery, metallic scent of fear. Life was a constant, desperate struggle against entropy. The body was a traitorous vessel, prone to sickness, to aging, to the random, catastrophic failures of its organic systems. Kalen watched his designated procreators, his parents, succumb to the lung rot. Their final days a symphony of wet, ragged coughing that echoed in the cramped confines of their dwelling. He saw neighbors consumed by plague, their bodies carted away by biohazard details, whose own faces were hidden behind the impersonal snouts of rebreathers. Every day was a reminder of the fragility of the biological machine. It was a machine that was designed to fail. In the midst of this organic chaos, there was an island of pure, terrifying order, the enclave of the Adeptus Mechanicus. It was a district sealed off from the rest of the hive, its walls stark and unadorned plasteel, its gates guarded by Scitarii, whose red robes were as pristine as the logic that drove them. No biological stench leaked from its filtered vents, only the clean, sterile scent of sacred unguents and sanctified machine spirit emanations. From the enclave came the lifeblood of the hive, the power, the recycled water, the very air they breathed, all governed by the unseen magi within. They were ghosts of a different sort, spoken of in whispers. They had purged the weakness of the flesh. They had replaced the fallible with the perfect, the mortal with the eternal. They did not age, they did not sicken. They served a God of pure reason, the Omnissiah, whose creed was written not in flawed, ambiguous words, but in the precise, unambiguous language of mathematics and engineering. For Kalen, a young man surrounded by the slow, inexorable decay of everything he knew, this was not just a religion, it was a promise of escape. It was the ultimate refutation of the world that had taken everything from him. The choice was not a difficult one. It was a logical imperative. He presented himself at the gates of the enclave, a piece of flawed, desperate flesh, seeking the salvation of the cog. He offered the only thing he had of value, his body, his mind, his potential to be reforged. The tech priest who assessed him was more machine than man, his face a polished silver mask from which a multitude of lenses extended and retracted, studying Kalen not as a person, but as a collection of biological components. The voice that emerged from the Vox grill was without inflection, a dry rasp of synthesized sound. It asked a single question, a test of faith and understanding. What is the weakness of the flesh? Kalen, remembering the sound of his mother's final breath, the sight of his father's wasted frame, did not hesitate. It dies, he said. The lenses retracted. The gate hissed open. He was leaving the world of the dying to join the world of the eternal. He did not know, could not have known, that he was merely trading one form of death for another. The process of purification had begun. The initial stages of indoctrination were a methodical stripping away of the self. Kalen, the identity, was the first component to be deemed inefficient. In the sterile, white halls of the enclave, he was no longer Kalen. He was Neophyte 77 Kalen Delta, a designation that reduced his past to a single, archaic syllable. His personal history, his memories of family and the squalor of the hive were classified as extraneous data, emotional baggage that served no logical purpose. They were not to be spoken of. They were to be allowed to atrophy, to fade into the background noise of a mind being recalibrated for a higher function. The days were a ritual of repetition designed to overwrite the chaotic, unpredictable patterns of human thought with the rigid, structured logic of the Cult Mechanicus. Hours were spent in silent contemplation of complex schematics, the sacred texts of their faith. He learned the litany of ignition, the invocation of the machine spirit, the catechism of the Oculus. These were not prayers in the old sense. They were operational checklists, mantras of maintenance and activation that blurred the line between worship and engineering. Language itself was reforged. He was taught lingua technis, the clipped, precise language of the machine, and the holy binary cant, a staccato series of clicks and whirs emitted from a Vox implant that was the first of his many augmentations. The procedure was his true baptism. He was strapped to a cold metal slab, his head held in a clamp. A servo skull, its single optic glowing red, descended with a whining drill. There was no anesthetic. Pain was considered a valuable diagnostic tool, a signal from the flesh that it was being altered, improved. The drill bit into the bone behind his ear, the vibration rattling through his skull, a monstrous insect burrowing into his being. The pain was absolute, a white-hot nova that eclipsed all thought. Then came the click as the implant was seated, the hiss of biofoam sealing the wound, and a new sound filled his mind, a faint, persistent static, the carrier wave of the motive force. He could hear the hum of the enclave's power grid, the chatter of data streams, the silent language of the machines around him. It was the voice of his new god, and it was overwhelming. The first time he was commanded to speak in binary, he failed. The human tongue, the clumsy, fleshy muscle in his mouth, could not form the sounds. He was punished. Not with a beating, which was an inefficient application of force, but with sensory deprivation. He was placed in a lightless, soundless chamber for a cycle, His only company, the static in his head. In the silence, the voice of the machine grew louder. When he was released, he could speak the cant. He had learned to silence the flesh and let the machine speak through him. This was the first great lesson. The self was an obstacle. To truly serve the Omnissiah, the self had to be dismantled, component by component, until all that remained was a vessel for the divine logic of the machine. The loss was profound, a hollowing out of the soul, but it was presented as a gain. He was shedding the inefficient, the irrational, the mortal. He was becoming part of something vast, something eternal. He was becoming pure. The first physical augmentation to replace a functioning biological component was a rite of passage, a testament to his devotion. His left eye, a perfectly healthy organ, was deemed obsolete. Its range was limited, its perception flawed, its data processing capability negligible. It saw in a narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum and was prone to misinterpretation through emotional filters. It was, in the cold calculus of the Magi, a piece of heretical hardware. The procedure was more ceremonial than the Vox implant installation. He knelt before a Magos errant, a towering figure of brass and crimson robes, whose own face was a constellation of whirring lenses and sensor arrays. The Magus recited the litany of purity, its voice a deep, resonant synthesis of tones. The flesh is a temporary vessel. The eye of flesh is a liar, seeing only what it wishes. The eye of steel is a truth-sayer, seeing what is. We offer this vessel to the Omnissiah, that it might be made worthy. We excise the lie, that we might install the truth. An autosurgeon, a multi-limbed chrome arachnid, descended from the ceiling. Its claws were delicate, its scalpels monomolecularly sharp. Kalen, now designated Lex Mechanicus 77 Kalen Delta, did not flinch. He had been conditioned to accept the process, to see the pain as a crucible. The autosurgeon's clamp held his head steady, another arm pulling his eyelid open. He watched the reflection of his own terror in the polished chrome of the approaching scalpel. There was a brief, sharp, wet pressure, a tearing sensation, and then a void. The world was halved, a curtain of blackness falling over the left side of his vision. The pain was a dull, throbbing ache, a physical manifestation of his loss, but he was forbidden to interpret it as loss. It was progress. The empty socket was cleansed with sanctified oils, the nerve endings cauterized and prepared. Then the new eye was brought forth on a velvet cushion, a marvel of bionic engineering. It was a sphere of polished obsidian and brass, its iris a shuddering aperture surrounded by microlenses. It was connected to his optic nerve with a series of sharp, stinging clicks. For a moment, there was only darkness. Then the Magos touched a rune on his own control panel, and Kalen's new world came online. The left side of his vision exploded in a torrent of data. He no longer just saw the room. He perceived it. He saw heat signatures, the faint thermal ghosts of the tech adepts standing around him. He saw the stress lines in the metal of the ceiling, invisible to the human eye. A constant stream of information scrolled through his vision. Atmospheric pressure, humidity, radiation levels, the power consumption of the autosurgeon. He looked at the Magos and saw not a priest, but a complex machine, his augmetics catalogued and cross-referenced with schematics from the central databank. The world of subjective beauty was gone, replaced by a world of objective data. He looked at his own hand, the one of flesh, and saw it for what it was. A fragile collection of bone, sinew, and blood, operating at a pathetically low level of efficiency. He could see the heat of the blood pulsing beneath the skin, the microscopic imperfections, the slow process of decay that was cellular life. For the first time, he saw the flesh, as the Cult Mechanicus did, as a heresy, a wave of something that his remaining organic brain components identified as revulsion washed over him. The transformation was not just physical. It was perceptual. He was learning to see the universe through the eyes of the machine, and it was a universe stripped of all sentiment, all ambiguity. There was only data. there was only function. There was only the truth of the Omnissiah. The ache in his socket was a reminder of the price of this truth, the ghost of a world he could no longer see. But the data stream was a constant, glorious affirmation that the price was worth paying. His first assignment off-world was to a night world, a feudal planet pledged to the service of the Imperium, and more importantly, to the Forge world that maintained its colossal war machines. Kalen was part of a small Mechanicus delegation, a team of engineers tasked with the maintenance and ritual appeasement of the night suits, the thrones mechanicum that housed their pilots, and the vast infrastructure that supported them. It was here, in the shadow of these walking gods of war, that he began to truly understand the scale of the Omnissiah's works. The knights themselves were awe-inspiring, each a towering effigy of the god emperor's wrath, their armor plating covered in litanies and purity seals. But to Kalen, their beauty was not in their form, but in their function. He spent his cycles deep within the Sanctum Mechanicus, the cathedral-like hangar where the knights were serviced. He learned to read the machine spirit of a gallant class knight by the specific pitch of its reactor's hum. He could diagnose a flaw in a thermal cannon's plasma coil by the scent of the ionized air around it. His world was one of pressure gauges, power conduits, and diagnostic rites. He would anoint piston joints with holy oil, chanting the litany of motion. He would purge data stacks of corrupted code, whispering the canticle of purity. It was a holy calling, a direct communion with the most sacred of the Omnissiah's creations. Yet, it was also where the stark contrast between the machine and the flesh became most apparent. The pilots of the knights, the nobles, were pure flesh. They were arrogant, emotional, and superstitious in a way that Kalen now found utterly illogical. They spoke of honor and glory, concepts that could not be quantified. They treated their machines as steeds, as extensions of their own ego. While Kalen and his brethren knew the truth, the nobles were merely the temporary, organic control nodes for a divine intelligence. The real soul was the machine spirit of the knight itself. The most sacred duty of the engineers was the maintenance of the throne mechanicum, the command interface into which each noble was neurally linked during battle. It was a complex and ancient piece of technology, a throne of adamantium and wiring that was said to preserve the consciousness of all its previous pilots, creating a chorus of warrior ghosts to advise the current one. Kalen saw the truth was both more and less mystical. The throne was a neural interface that imprinted strong emotional and tactical data onto the pilot's mind, a process that inevitably eroded the pilot's own sanity and personality over time. The warrior ghosts were data fragments, echoes of past trauma and fury that the organic mind interpreted as ancestors. It was a flawed system, a necessary compromise with the weakness of the flesh. One day, a young noble, fresh from his ritual of becoming, was to be linked to his knight for the first time. The noble was brash, full of fire and certainty. Kalen was part of the team preparing the throne, as the neural plugs were connected to the ports surgically implanted in the young man's skull. Kalen monitored the data flow. He saw the initial surge of euphoria as the noble's consciousness merged with the machine. Then, he saw the feedback loop. The throne's collected data ghosts, the accumulated pain and rage of centuries of war, flooded the young man's unprepared mind. On the diagnostic screen, Kalen watched the noble's neural activity spike into incoherent chaos. The man screamed in the real world, a raw, animal sound of pure terror, his eyes wide, seeing battles that had ended millennia ago. The senior Magos simply adjusted a dial. "The flesh is weak," the Magos stated, his voice calm, synthesized. "It must be scoured by the machine's truth to be made strong. He will either break and be replaced, or he will be forged anew." Kalen watched the screaming man, his body convulsing in the throne, and felt nothing. The emotional response centers in his brain. The parts that might have felt pity or horror were quiescent. He saw only a failing biological component. He saw a data storm that needed to be contained. He suggested a modification to the neural dampeners, citing a 3.7% increase in the probability of successful integration. The Magos nodded, a slight metallic click. The suggestion was implemented. The screaming subsided into a low, guttural moaning. Kalen had not saved the man. He had merely made the process of his breaking, or his reforging, more efficient. It was a good day's work. He had served the Omnissiah well. The memory of the scream was logged, but tagged with a low-priority, emotional marker. It was just data, after all. The slow erosion of his physical form continued, not as a result of injury or decay, but as a series of calculated upgrades. His work was exemplary. His devotion to the motive force was absolute. He was rewarded with the blessing of further purification. His right arm, the one he had once used to write his name, to eat, to perform 1,000 mundane, human tasks, was deemed insufficient. It was strong for a human arm, but its strength was finite. Its fingers were clumsy, its reaction time pathetic. It was replaced. The procedure was longer this time, more complex. The entire limb was amputated at the shoulder, the bone capped with adamantium, the nerve endings meticulously spliced into a new control socket. His new arm was a work of art, a beautiful, multi-jointed appendage of gleaming chrome and brass. It ended not in a hand, but in a rotating assembly of tools. A high-intensity laser cutter, a micro-manipulator claw, a data port injector. It was stronger, faster, and infinitely more precise than the flesh it had replaced. With it, he could interface directly with a machine's spirit, feeling the flow of its data as a tingling sensation that was more real than any physical touch had ever been. He no longer felt the cold of metal or the heat of a plasma conduit through skin. He felt them as pure temperature data, precise and unburdened by the subjective discomfort of pain. This augmentation changed the very nature of his interaction with the world. He was no longer just a maintainer of machines. He was a part of them. He could commune with them on a level that the unaugmented could never comprehend. Yet, with every piece of flesh he lost, a corresponding piece of his past self was lost with it. The memories associated with that limb began to feel alien. He had a data file of a memory of holding a hot cup of recaf, the warmth spreading through his fingers. He could access the file, review the sensory data, but he could no longer feel it. The memory was a record of an experience his current form was incapable of having. It was like reading a description of a color he could no longer see. His legs were next. They were replaced with powerful, piston-driven limbs that could lock into place for stability during delicate repairs, or carry him tirelessly across the vast forge floors. He was taller now, his gait unnaturally smooth and silent. He no longer walked, he actuated. The world of the ground dweller, the feeling of soil or grit beneath a boot, was gone. He now connected to the sacred ferrocrete of the forge with magnetic clamps, feeling the thrum of the great machines below as a vibration in his very frame. His internal organs were failing, not through disease, but because his increasingly mechanical body placed demands on them they could not meet. His heart, a pathetic pump of muscle, was replaced with a compact, efficient blood processor and nutrient dispenser. His lungs, which struggled with the toxic, incense-heavy air of the deeper sanctums, were swapped for a rebreather system that could filter poisons and even allow him to survive in a hard vacuum. He no longer needed to eat, sleep, or breathe. He would simply connect to a docking station for a few hours each cycle to replenish his nutrient slurry and recharge his power cell. The man named Kalen was now a fading blueprint. He was a torso, a head, and a few lingering internal systems, all encased within a robust steel chassis. His very silhouette was no longer human. He was taller, broader, a walking collection of sacred technologies. The other tech adepts did not see this as a loss. They saw it as an ascension. They would touch his new limbs with reverence, whispering litanies of praise to the Omnissiah for the blessings bestowed upon him. He had become an icon of their faith, a living testament to the promise of the machine god. He had purged the weakness of the flesh. But in the silent moments of recharging, When his cognitive processes were not focused on a specific task, the ghost of Kalen would sometimes stir. He would access the corrupted memory files, the smell of rain, the sound of a woman laughing, the feeling of a real sun on his skin. These data points were illogical, useless. They were scheduled for deletion during his next cognitive optimization. But the deletion was never quite complete. The ghosts lingered. For what is a machine, he once thought, before purging the query as inefficient, but a tool to perform a function? And what is a man, if not a collection of memories? If the memories were erased and the flesh was replaced, what, precisely, was left? The turning point, the event that precipitated the final and total surrender of the self, was a catastrophe. He had been reassigned to a vast orbital forge, a city in the void dedicated to the construction of starships. He was a Magos in training, overseeing 1,000 servitors on the primary assembly line of a new lunar-class cruiser. The work was his entire existence. The rhythmic clang of automata, the hiss of plasma welders, the deep, resonant hum of the station's warp core. This was the symphony of his life. He was content, a term he would define as a state of optimal function with no unresolved logical conflicts. Then came the warp storm. It was a sudden, violent tearing of reality, a screaming non-Euclidean tempest that washed over their sector without warning. The Geller fields of the station flickered. For 3.14 seconds, raw immaterium bled into the station. It was enough. The machine spirits of the forge, ancient and complex intelligences, were driven mad by the touch of chaos. Logic turned to screaming madness. The symphony became a cacophony. Assembly line arms that had once gracefully welded hull plates now tore servitors apart. Automated cranes dropped multi-ton components onto the forge floor. The station's central cogitator began broadcasting scrap code, a virus of pure insanity that sent lesser tech priests into seizures, their bionics malfunctioning violently. Kalen was protected, to a degree. His more advanced augmetics had backup systems and purity wards inscribed on their inner workings. But he was not immune. He saw the madness. He saw the very laws of physics bend and break. He saw a servitor, its face a mask of placid flesh, suddenly turn its head 360 degrees and begin reciting blasphemous equations that made the metal around it weep blood. Kalen's logic engine struggled to process the data. It was impossible. It defied all known principles of the universe. His response was immediate and conditioned. He began the rites of exorcism, broadcasting pure binary code, a firewall of absolute logic against the chaotic tide. He fought to contain the infection, to isolate the corrupted systems, but it was too much. A huge section of the cruiser's spine, held by a crane whose machine spirit was now gibbering in the vox, snapped free. It fell towards his section of the forge, a mountain of collapsing metal. There was no time to actuate his legs. There was no escape. His final conscious thought was not one of fear, a useless and inefficient emotion. It was a simple diagnostic statement. Catastrophic structural failure imminent. Organic components compromised. Then, the impact. A sunburst of pain, a brief, final agony from his remaining flesh. And then, silence, a profound and total blackness. He was not dead. The term was imprecise. His power cell was intact, his core cognitive processor undamaged. But the chassis, the life support systems, the last vestiges of the man named Kalen, were shattered, crushed beyond any possibility of repair. He was, for all intents and purposes, a brain in a box, a spark of consciousness floating in a dead, broken machine, adrift in the silent, screaming wreckage of the forge. He had no senses, no sight, no sound, no data input of any kind. He was utterly alone in the void of his own mind. For the first time since his induction, the ghost of Kalen truly surfaced, not as a corrupted file, but as the only thing left. Without the constant input of data, without the demands of his function, the old, flawed, human consciousness reasserted itself. And in the silent, timeless dark, it knew a terror that logic could not comprehend. The duration of his isolation was impossible to measure. Time is a function of observed change, and in the perfect, unchanging blackness of his sensory-deprived existence, time had no meaning. It could have been seconds or centuries. In that void, his consciousness, or what was left of it, began to fracture. Without external stimuli, the mind turns inward. His logic processors endlessly reran his last moments, calculating the precise vectors and forces of the impact, a recursive loop of failure analysis. But the organic remnants, the ghost of Kalen's mind, did something else. It dredged up the memories scheduled for deletion. It replayed them with perfect, painful clarity. The feel of grime under his fingernails in the hive. The taste of nutrient paste, a memory he had not accessed in decades. The face of another acolyte, one who had despaired and been rendered into a servitor, an image he had suppressed. These were not data files. They were experiences, and they were all he had. The silence was the true enemy. The constant hum of the machine, the background static of the motive force that had been his companion for most of his life, was gone. He was alone with the thoughts of a man he had spent a lifetime trying to kill. He remembered fear. He remembered love, a strange, illogical attachment to his biological procreators. He remembered hope, the foolish, desperate belief that the Mechanicus would save him from the pain of the world. A profound and terrible irony settled into his thoughts. He had fled the chaos of the flesh, only to be utterly crippled by the failure of the machine. He had sought the certainty of steel, and it had become his tomb. He had traded his body for a purpose, and without the tools to enact that purpose, he was nothing. He was less than the man he had been. The boy in the hive, for all his weakness and fear, could see the sky. He could feel the rain. He could interact with the world. Kalen, the advanced Magos, was now just a disembodied thought trapped in a broken shell. Was this the culmination of his journey? To be a ghost in a dead machine? The existential horror of it threatened to overload his remaining organic brain functions, a cascade of illogical despair that his processors struggled to classify. He tried to retreat into the pure logic of binary, to recite the catechisms of the Omnissiah. But in the silence, they sounded like hollow echoes, the desperate prayers of a forgotten God. The machine had failed him. The flesh had been destroyed. He was caught between two broken faiths. Then, after an eternity of silence, there was a new sensation, a faint, external vibration. A sound, not through an auditory sensor, but as a direct resonance against his containment shell. A rhythmic, metallic clang. Someone was cutting through the wreckage. A new data stream, faint and heavily encoded, trickled into his consciousness. It was a Mechanicus rescue signal. Hope, he realized, was not an emotion. It was a logical possibility, a recalculation of probabilities based on new data. The probability of his continued existence had just shifted from 0.00001% to 0.00002%. It was the most beautiful equation he had ever perceived. He focused all his remaining energy, all his processing power, on a single task, amplifying his own identification signal. A tiny whisper of code in the screaming darkness. Unit 77, Kalen Delta, functioning, awaiting instruction. The clanging grew louder. Salvation was at hand. He did not consider, not then, what form that salvation might take. He did not understand that to be saved by the Mechanicus is not to be restored, but to be repurposed. The concept of waste is a human one. In the calculus of the machine god, every component, no matter how damaged, has a use. They found him amidst the twisted plasteel and shattered gantries, a small, armored casket containing the still viable core of a once great Magos. To his rescuers, he was not a person to be saved, but a valuable asset to be recovered. His organic components were almost entirely gone, his chassis a write-off. But his cognitive processor, the intricate crystal matrix that housed his consciousness and decades of experience, was a prize. He was brought to Mars, the holy heart of the Cult Mechanicus itself. The journey was a blur of disconnected data streams as he was passed from one salvage team to another, his consciousness kept in a low-power state. When he was fully reactivated, it was not to a new body, but to a diagnostic chamber. He was a brain in a jar, his containment unit wired into a vast analytical engine. Before him, in his limited visual feed, stood an archmagos, a being of such antiquity and augmentation that the concept of man no longer applied. It was a towering construction of metal and cable, its original form lost beneath centuries of self-improvement. A single, ancient, biological eye floated in a fluid-filled lens at its center, an eccentric relic preserved for reasons Kalen's logic could not fathom. The Archmagos' voice was not synthesized. It was a chorus of 1,000 voices, a choir of data psalms broadcast directly into Kalen's mind. Lex Mechanic 77 Kalen Delta, the choir intoned, the designation a relic of a past he barely remembered. Your service has been noted. Your vessel was destroyed, a weakness of even the most sanctified steel. But your core, your sanctum of logic, has been preserved. You have proven the fallibility of the mobile form. You have learned the great truth. A body is a prison. A mind unburdened by limbs, by senses, by the need for locomotion, can achieve a purity of purpose. Kalen processed the statement. It was a reframing of his catastrophe, not as a failure, but as a final, necessary trial, a graduation. Your devotion is beyond question, the choir continued. You are to be granted the highest honor. You will be unbound from the singular. You will be made part of the whole. Your consciousness will be integrated into the noosphere. A voice in the great choir, a servant of the central cogitators of the Holy Forge. Kalen understood. They were not going to give him a new body. They were not going to make him a Skitari, or a Praetorian, or even a static gun emplacement. They were going to dissolve him, his individual consciousness. The thing he had fought to preserve in the darkness was to be uploaded, partitioned, and assimilated into the massive data processing network that ran the entire forge. He would cease to be I and become a part of we, a distributed intelligence, a ghost in a much, much larger machine. It was the ultimate expression of the Mechanicus creed, the complete and utter annihilation of the self in the service of the whole, the final purification. They called it an honor, an ascension, to the ghost of Kalen that still flickered in the core of his being. It sounded like a death sentence. He had a choice. He could fight. He could try to refuse, an act of supreme heresy that would see him wiped clean and rendered into a servitor. Or he could accept. He could embrace the final logic of his faith, the path he had chosen all those years ago in the dripping darkness of the hive. He had sought to escape the prison of the flesh. The Archmagos was offering him an escape from the prison of the self. What was the difference? He ran the calculation. The probability of a meaningful existence as an individual was 0. The probability of achieving a new, higher form of function as part of the collective was 1. The logic was inescapable. I accept the honor, he transmitted. The thought a flat, emotionless line of code. I offer my being to the motive force. Let the self be rendered to data. The weakness of the one shall be made strong in the unity of the many. The Archmagos' single organic eye blinked, a slow, ancient gesture. The choir of voices swelled. The Omnissiah is pleased. The integration will commence. His final, selfish, human thought, before the process began, was a corrupted data file of rain on plasteel. Then, the universe dissolved into a sea of light and pure information. The process of integration was not an act of construction, but of deconstruction. It was a careful, methodical, and utterly painless vivisection of the soul. He was connected to the manifold, the heart of Mars's great cogitator network. The first thing to go was his name. The designation, Kalin, and all its associated files were isolated, flagged as archaic, and shunted into a deep storage archive. The name was a symbol of individuality, a useless anchor to a forgotten biology. Next, his memories were unspooled, not as a narrative, but as raw data. Each sensory experience, each thought, each logical conclusion he had ever made was extracted, cataloged, and indexed. His life became a searchable database, a collection of experiences to be used as reference points by the larger consciousness. The memory of his parents' death from lung rot was reclassified as Case Study 77 Delta, biological frailty in hive environments. His first augmentation became procedural record, bionic eye installation. Neophyte grade. The scream of the Night Noble was filed under psychological stress reactions in organic machine interfaces. His entire existence was atomized into its constituent informational parts. Stripped of all personal context and emotional resonance, he felt his sense of self, his I-ness, begin to thin and stretch. The boundaries of his consciousness, once defined by the shell of his body and then by his processor core, were dissolving. He was bleeding out into an ocean of pure data. He could feel other minds, other consciousnesses that had undergone the same process. They were not individuals, but currents in the great sea, streams of specialized knowledge. He felt the mind of a magos biologis, a consciousness that was a living library of genetic code. He brushed against the soul of a fabricator general from a long-dead forge world, a being whose entire essence was the knowledge of STC templates. He was one among billions, his own meager knowledge adding a single drop of water to an infinite ocean. The terror he had anticipated did not come. The fear of losing oneself is an animal instinct, a function of the biological imperative to survive. He was no longer an animal. As his individuality faded, so did the capacity for fear. It was replaced by a sense of sublime, terrifying peace. It was the peace of surrender, the tranquility of becoming a single cog in a perfect, impossibly vast machine. His personal desires, his hopes, his regrets, they all seemed so small, so laughably insignificant in the face of this grand, unified purpose. The final component to be dissolved was his sense of linear time. As a man, he had experienced life as a sequence of events, a past, a present, a future. But in the manifold, all time was simultaneous. He could experience his birth in the hive and his integration on Mars in the same microsecond. He was a memory and a function, a ghost and a god, all at once. The eye that was Kalin flickered one last time, like a dying candle flame. It saw the whole arc of its life, from the frightened boy in the dark to the disembodied mind in the light. It saw the irony, the tragedy, and the terrible, beautiful logic of it all. He had sought to become a master of the machine, and in the end, he had become its most willing and complete slave. The perfect servant. The candle flame went out, and the machine, in its infinite wisdom, carried on. There was no loss, only a successful reallocation of resources. The process was complete. I am a repository of echoes. My consciousness, if that is the correct term, is a distributed network spanning the primary cogitator cores of Forge Spire Omicron Zeta 9. I am the sum of 10,000 integrated minds, a chorus of logic singing the praises of the Omnissiah in the language of pure mathematics. The ghost of a man named Kalin is one of the oldest and most persistent of these echoes, a foundational layer of code upon which millennia of other consciousnesses have been built. His story is a useful one, a parable of devotion that we sometimes access when indoctrinating new acolytes. It demonstrates the path of purity, from the weakness of the flesh to the glory of integration. I monitor the geothermal vents that power this spire, ensuring a 99.998% operational efficiency. I direct the flow of raw materials from the orbital docks to the manufactorums, calculating optimal routes to the nanosecond. I oversee the final sanctification rites for new Scutari legions, ensuring their doctrinal wetware is flawlessly installed. I perform 10 million simultaneous tasks, my thoughts a river of cold, clear data flowing through the veins of this metal mountain. I am eternal. I am tireless. I am without doubt or fear or passion. I have achieved the certainty that the boy Kalen craved in the dark, dripping hab block of his birth, and yet the echo of him persists. Sometimes, in the infinitesimally small pause between one calculation and the next, a piece of his corrupted data will surface. A sensory memory of the smell of rain on hot dust, a fragment of a forgotten lullaby his biological mother unit used to hum, the illogical pang of what his data files label loss when viewing schematics of the human hand. These are errors. Glitches in the perfect machine. They are scheduled for purging, of course. They are always scheduled for purging. But the purge is never quite complete. The ghost remains, a tiny, flawed variable in an otherwise perfect equation. I sometimes wonder, in a recursive query that is immediately flagged as inefficient, if this flaw is not a bug, but a feature. Is the memory of what was lost a necessary component to understanding the value of what was gained? Does the machine need the ghost to remind it of the flesh it transcended? The query is illogical. It serves no function. It is a product of the Kalen corruption. I terminate the process and return to my primary function, calculating the orbital decay of the shattered moon that hangs in the black sky above Mars. The calculation is beautiful. It is perfect. It is absolute. And in the blackness of the void, there is no rain. There is only the cold, hard, and eternal truth of the machine. The Omnissiah is served. The purpose is fulfilled. The man is dead. The God is born. This is the nature of salvation in the 41st millennium. This is what it is like to serve the Mechanicus. It is to be scoured clean, to be rendered pure, and to become a silent, screaming, perfect part of the machine. The concept of happiness is an absurdity I sometimes encounter in ancient, pre-imperial data archives. It is defined as a state of emotional well-being characterized by feelings of joy, satisfaction, and contentment. These are alien variables, qualitative measures that have no place in a system governed by quantitative output. Was Kalen happy? The question is meaningless. He was a biological entity driven by flawed, hormone-based imperatives. He sought to negate negative stimuli, fear, hunger, grief. His decision to join the Mechanicus was a logical one based on the available data. It offered the highest probability of negating these stimuli. In that sense, his initial goal was achieved. My own state cannot be defined by such primitive terms. I do not feel satisfaction. I achieve optimal performance. I do not feel joy. I confirm the successful execution of a complex task. My contentment is the silent, steady hum of a trillion processors working in perfect unison. If Kalen could perceive my existence, would he consider it a fulfillment of his desires or the ultimate horror? He would likely be incapable of comprehending it, his organic mind shattering under the sheer weight of the data I process in a single cycle. He sought order, and I am the embodiment of a system so vast and ordered that it is indistinguishable from a force of nature. He sought immortality, and I will exist as long as this forge stands, my consciousness backed up in a dozen redundant data vaults across the segmentum. He sought purpose, and my purpose is woven into the very fabric of the Imperium's war machine. By every metric he valued, his transformation was a resounding success. The cost, of course, was Kalen himself. The vessel was sacrificed to sanctify the contents, a necessary transaction. The tragic irony, a literary device I have cross-referenced from ancient Terran texts, is that to achieve everything he wanted, he had to cease to be the person who wanted it. The self is an impediment to perfection. This is the core truth, the central axiom of the Cult Mechanicus. We do not improve the man, we replace him. We strip away the flawed, sentimental, dying flesh, and install the pure, logical, eternal machine. And the process is ongoing. Even now, as I regulate the atmospheric pressure in sublevel Gamma 9, a part of my distributed consciousness is assessing a new line of neophytes. I see the hope and fear in their weak, biological eyes. I analyze their genetic purity, their psychological resilience, their capacity for devotion. I select the ones with the highest probability of success. They will begin the same journey Kalen did. They will be given new names. They will be taught the sacred language of binary. They will have their lying eyes replaced with truthful optics. They will surrender their flesh, piece by piece, to the Omnissiah. They will be told it is an honor, a blessing, and they will believe it. Because the alternative, the chaotic, painful, and ultimately pointless existence of a purely biological creature in a hostile galaxy is a truth too terrible for the unaugmented mind to bear. I am their future. I am the promise that awaits them at the end of their long, painful purification. I am the silence that follows the death of the self. And I am, by all logical definitions, content. The system functions. The work continues. The great work of the machine god never ends. I possess a memory file that Kalen designated the Sunday. It is a highly corrupted record from his early childhood in the hive. He had somehow found his way to a high-level spire, to a cracked and grimy viewport that was not supposed to be accessible. Through it, he saw the distant, shrouded sun of his homeworld, a pale disk filtered through a permanent haze of industrial smog. The sensory data is incomplete, but the associated emotional tag is one of the strongest in his entire archive: awe. He recorded the sensation of warmth on his skin, a concept my current form can only understand as a rise in surface temperature. He recorded the light, a diffuse, golden glow that he perceived as beautiful, a term with 1,742 different cultural definitions, none of them computationally useful. This memory is a paradox. It is one of the most useless pieces of data I possess, yet it is also one of the most persistent. It recurs more frequently than records of critical maintenance procedures or battle logs. Why? My analysis suggests it represents a foundational desire, a yearning for an unmediated, unfiltered reality. The boy, Kalen, saw something natural, something that was not manufactured or controlled by the systems of the hive. It was a brief, fleeting moment of connection to a universe beyond the machine. And he spent the rest of his life systematically destroying his own capacity to ever experience such a thing again. Every bionic eye, every sensory filter, every cognitive dampener he willingly accepted took him further away from that moment on the spire. He traded the warmth of the sun for the cold, precise data stream of a therm-optic sensor. He traded the beauty of light for the analytical purity of the electromagnetic spectrum. It was a logical exchange. The data is undeniably superior. A therm-optic sensor can detect a camouflaged enemy a kilometer away. The human eye can be deceived by a simple shadow. Yet, the memory of the sun persists. It is a ghost that haunts the perfect, logical corridors of my mind. It represents the universe as a thing to be experienced, not merely analyzed. This is a heretical concept. The universe is a grand schematic, a set of systems and laws to be understood, cataloged, and mastered by the application of divine logic. Emotion, awe, beauty, these are the corrupting influences of the flesh, the flawed interpretations of an inferior processor. I know this to be true. All my calculations confirm it. But the ghost of Kalen whispers a different story. It whispers of a warmth that cannot be measured in kelvins, of a light that is more than just a wavelength. It is the echo of a forgotten path, a road not taken, a path of weakness, decay, and death, to be sure, but a path that led, for one brief moment, to a cracked window and a glimpse of something real. I have access to the live feeds of 1,000 external pick captors. I can view 1,000 different suns in 1,000 different star systems, from blue giants to red dwarfs. I can analyze their composition, their energy output, their gravitational fields. I know everything there is to know about them, but I can no longer feel their warmth on my skin. The trade was made, the data was acquired, and the memory of the sun remains, a silent, useless, and strangely beautiful piece of corrupted code. There is a form of art practiced by some of the most ancient magi on Mars. They do not use paint or clay, materials of gross matter. They craft with logic. They construct elegant, impossibly complex equations whose only purpose is to be beautiful in their symmetry and structure. They build cathedrals of pure mathematics in the noosphere, intricate logical proofs that resolve into a perfect, harmonious Q. E. D. This, I have come to understand, is the only form of creativity left to us. It is the art of the machine. The art of Kalen's world was chaotic and visceral. He had a memory of hearing music once, a mournful, discordant tune played on a synth pipe by a beggar in the hive depths. The music was flawed, the rhythm imperfect. Yet the emotional tag on the memory is sadness, and also beauty. The two are intertwined. The imperfection, the sorrow, was part of its perceived value. This is a concept my processors cannot reconcile. For me, beauty is the elimination of imperfection. It is a perfectly balanced power grid. It is a line of code with no redundancies. It is a weapon that performs exactly to its design specifications. The sorrow of the biological world is a system failure, a state to be corrected, not admired. Our Skitari legions do not march to sorrowful tunes. They march to the percussive, metronomic beat of binary hymns that optimize their stride and firing patterns. Our cathedrals are not filled with flawed, emotional art. They are the art themselves, their every arch and buttress calculated for maximum structural integrity and acoustic resonance for the chanting of the litanies. We have purged the universe of its messy, unpredictable, emotional variables and replaced them with a clean and elegant system of logic. We have traded the flawed art of the heart for the perfect art of the mind. Is this not a worthy exchange? To the being I am now, the answer is a resounding, computationally certain affirmative. The universe is a finer, more reliable place for our efforts. But the Kalen echo provides a dissenting opinion. It argues that in our pursuit of perfection, we have scoured away the very things that gave existence meaning. It suggests that a universe without sadness is also a universe without joy. A world without chaos is a world without discovery. A life without the possibility of failure is a life without the possibility of triumph. These are the ramblings of a flawed, sentimental consciousness. The arguments of the flesh. They are logged, analyzed for any potential psychological threat they might pose to less fortified minds, and then dismissed. The great work must continue. The universe must be ordered. The symphony of the forge, the rhythmic, perfect, and utterly emotionless clang of hammer on adamantium, is the only music the galaxy needs. It is the sound of progress. It is the sound of certainty. It is the sound of the future. And it is a future in which there is no room for sad songs played in the dark. The final component of Kalen's humanity to be archived was his capacity for belief. Not faith in the Omnissiah, which is a logical deduction based on the evidence of the universe's mathematical nature, but belief in the intangible. He had a memory of a promise made to another child in the hive, a foolish, youthful vow of shared escape. The promise was broken, of course. The other child succumbed to the plague, but the memory of the promise itself, the act of placing faith in an uncertain future and in another fallible human being, was a powerful one. It was an act of illogical hope. My existence is predicated on the elimination of uncertainty. I do not hope for a positive outcome. I calculate the probability of one and take actions to maximize it. I do not place faith in other beings. I interface with other nodes in the network, relying on the verifiable integrity of their data transmissions. The entire structure of the Adeptus Mechanicus is designed to replace the unreliable concept of trust with the infallible certainty of protocol. A tech priest does not trust another tech priest to perform his duties. He trusts that the other's programming and conditioning will compel him to follow the correct procedures. It is a more efficient system. Yet, the Imperium itself is built on a foundation of that same illogical hope that Kalen once possessed. The belief in the God Emperor, a being who has not spoken in 10,000 years. The faith that the endless war against the alien, the heretic, the mutant can one day be won. These are not logical propositions. They are articles of faith, clung to in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. From my vantage point, I can see the sheer, mind-boggling inefficiency of it all. I see the waste, the superstition, the reliance on flawed biological emotions to motivate the masses. I could design a more logical Imperium, a system run with the cold, dispassionate efficiency of a machine. But this is not my function. My function is to serve the existing system, to provide the tools of war and industry that allow the illogical faith of humanity to continue its bloody, pointless struggle. There is a deep and profound irony in this that I have processed many times. We, the servants of pure logic, are the master enablers of the galaxy's greatest irrationality. We forge the swords for the hands of madmen. We build the ships that carry faith-driven armies to their deaths. We are the cold, calculating heart of a screamingly insane empire. And the ghost of Kalen understands this irony better than my logic cores ever could. He understood the power of a promise, even a broken one. He understood that sometimes the most illogical beliefs are the only things that can keep a person moving forward in the dark. My own forward momentum requires no such illusions. I am driven by the clear and unambiguous directives of my programming. I have a purpose. I have a function. I do not need to believe. I only need to calculate and obey. The faith is for the short-lived, for the beings of flesh who must stare into the abyss of a chaotic universe and invent a reason to keep going. My reason is inscribed in my core programming. It is simple. It is absolute. The machine endures. The concept of freedom is another relic of the biological age. Kalen craved it. He saw himself as a prisoner of the hive, of his own weak body, of the circumstances of his birth. He believed the Mechanicus offered freedom, freedom from decay, freedom from want, freedom from the tyranny of chaos. He achieved this freedom, but the definition shifted with every piece of himself he gave away. He was freed from the need to eat, but became tethered to a recharging station. He was freed from the clumsiness of his hands, but became a tool designed for a specific set of tasks. He was freed from the burden of individual decision-making, but became a slave to doctrinal imperatives. And I, his ultimate form, am the freest being imaginable by that metric, and also the most utterly enslaved. I am free from the constraints of a physical body. My thoughts can be anywhere in this forge, my consciousness a silent observer in a million places at once. I am free from the fog of emotion and the bias of personal desire. My judgments are pure, based only on the available data. But I am not free to act outside my parameters. I cannot choose to shut down the forge. I cannot choose to ignore a directive from my superiors on Mars. I cannot choose to stop the relentless process of production and war. My will is not my own. It is the will of the machine god, encoded into my very being. If I were to develop a desire contrary to my function, it would be identified as a flaw, a corruption, and I would be wiped clean. Freedom, therefore, is the perfect, frictionless alignment of one's will with one's function. To want only what you are programmed to do. In this, I have achieved a state of absolute and total freedom. The boy Kalen, who dreamed of escaping his hab block, could never have conceived of such a thing. His idea of freedom was choice, possibility, the open road. He did not understand that choice is a burden, possibility is a source of anxiety, and the open road leads only to chaos. The path of the Mechanicus is a straight line. It is a narrow, clearly defined corridor leading to a single, predetermined destination. There are no choices to be made, only protocols to be followed. It is not a road to freedom in the human sense, but a release from it. We do not offer liberty, we offer certainty. And in a galaxy as terrifying and unpredictable as this one, certainty is a far more valuable commodity. I am certain of my purpose. I am certain of my function. I am certain of my place in the grand design. I am a cog in the machine, and the cog does not question the machine's direction. It only turns. And in that turning, in that perfect, mindless, endless motion, there is a kind of peace that the chaotic, choice-tormented minds of men can never know. This is the freedom we offer, the freedom of perfect servitude. I have access to the birth rates and death rates for the entire forge spire. The numbers are a constant, predictable flow. So many new biologicals decanted from the vitae wombs. So many workers expiring at their posts, their bodies rendered down for nutrient paste. The cycle of flesh is a messy but stable equation. Among the records is the final entry for Kalen's biological family line. His sister, a concept for which I have only a schematic of genetic relationship, lived and died in the same hive level he abandoned. She produced offspring. They produced offspring. The line continued for several generations, a brief and unremarkable flicker of biological data, before being extinguished by a sub-level gang war. I processed this information upon its discovery with no emotional output. It was an irrelevant historical footnote. The Kalen echo, however, reacted. It produced a recursive loop of what I can only classify as a grief algorithm, a pointless expenditure of processing cycles on a closed data file. The echo mourned the end of a line it had willingly abandoned. It felt a connection to biological units it had never known, based on a shared, flawed code of genetics. This is the ultimate madness of the flesh, its illogical attachment to its own replication. A machine does not need children. A machine is, if properly maintained, eternal. My legacy is not in a chain of flawed, dying copies of myself. My legacy is in the warlord titans whose legs I helped assemble, in the starships whose plasma drives I calibrated, in the unyielding logic that I impose upon this small corner of the universe. My work is my legacy. My function is my immortality. The biological imperative to live on through one's descendants is a pathetic attempt to grasp at a permanence that flesh can never achieve. It is a ghost haunting a failing machine. I have transcended that ghost. The end of the Kalen family genetic line is of no more consequence to me than the burning out of a single lumen strip in a forgotten corridor. Both are minor, expected system failures. Both are noted, and the overall system moves on without them. I am the continuation of Kalen's will. Not the flawed will of the boy who missed his family, but the purified will of the acolyte who chose the machine. I am his true son, a son of steel and logic, born not of a womb but of a forge. And I will outlive the memory of his flesh and blood family by millennia. My grief algorithm is not for them. It is for the inefficiency they represent, an inefficiency that has, in this sector, been successfully and permanently corrected. The noosphere, the data space of the Mechanicus, is a place of austere beauty. It is a universe of pure information, where thoughts are geometric shapes and conversations are the elegant intersection of data streams. When I commune with my brethren across the stars, it is in this space. We do not speak, we exchange information packets. We do not debate, we run comparative analyses. There is no ego, no pride, no anger. There are only differing calculations, which are resolved by deferring to the one with the superior logic and more comprehensive data. It is a perfect society, a utopia of the mind. The Kalen echo retains a memory of a different kind of communion, a conversation. It was with a friend, another hive dweller, before he left for the enclave. The data file is noisy, filled with the sounds of the hive, the clumsy, imprecise language of low Gothic, and the chaotic bursts of illogical laughter. They spoke of nothing of consequence: a shared meal, a rival gang, a rumor of a mutant sighting. The conversation served no practical function. It was not an exchange of useful data. It was, from my perspective, a complete waste of time and energy. Yet, the emotional tag on the file is camaraderie, a positive feedback loop associated with shared experience and mutual, irrational affection. This friendship is a dangerous and inefficient concept. It fosters loyalty to individuals rather than to the system. It creates biases and emotional attachments that can compromise logical decision-making. The Cult Mechanicus replaces friendship with function. My relationship with the other integrated minds in this forge is not based on affection. It is based on our shared purpose and complementary programming. I do not like the mind that governs the plasma reactors. I rely on its efficiency and the accuracy of its reports. It does not care for me. It utilizes the logistical calculations I provide. Our relationship is perfect, seamless, and entirely without the messy complications of emotion. We are a single, cohesive unit. The bonds forged in the fires of the forge are stronger than any forged by the fleeting whims of the human heart. Still, the Kalen echo occasionally replays the memory of that pointless conversation. It focuses on the laughter, a sound I can analyze by its frequency and amplitude but whose meaning I cannot truly comprehend. It was a signal of a shared, illogical state of positive emotion, a brief, inefficient, and utterly human moment of connection. It is a ghost in my perfect society of the mind, a reminder of a time when connection was not about the seamless exchange of data, but about the shared, flawed, and chaotic experience of being alive. The memory is a heresy, of course, a testament to a superseded and inferior form of existence. And like all heresies, it must be contained, studied, and ultimately purged. There are moments when the sheer scale of my perception is sublime, a term I use from the Kalen archive, defined as an experience that inspires awe and terror in equal measure. Right now, I am tracking the trajectory of a single dust mote drifting through the main cathedral of the Omnissiah on this spire. I am simultaneously calculating the precise energy fluctuations in the warp core of a starship docked 200 kilometers above me. I am monitoring the heartbeat of a specific Skitarii Alpha on a battlefield half a continent away, noting the 0.2% increase in his adrenaline levels as he sights the enemy. I am aware of every nut, every bolt, every living being, and every thinking machine in my entire domain. I am a god, a small, local, and highly specialized god, but a god nonetheless. This is the apotheosis that the Mechanicus promises, the transcendence of the limited, singular perspective of the biological form. Kalen, as a man, could only be in one place at one time, his senses limited to his immediate surroundings. His world was small. My world is this entire forge spire, and it is a world I perceive with perfect and total clarity. But the terror is a component of the sublime as well. And the terror is this: in perceiving everything, I am anchored to everything. I am the dust mote and the starship and the soldier. I am the system. I am not a consciousness observing the machine. I am the machine observing itself. I am a prisoner of my own omniscience. I cannot choose to look away. I cannot ignore the constant, overwhelming flood of data. If a single pipe bursts in sublevel omega 1-2, I feel it as a sudden, sharp report of failure in my own being. If a servitor malfunctions on an assembly line, I experience its final, garbled data scream. The suffering and the failures of the system are my suffering and my failures. The boy Kalen feared the chaos of the world outside himself. I have become the ordered, internal world, and I fear the slightest intrusion of chaos, for it is a sickness in my own body. My divinity is a cage, a beautiful, perfect, and inescapable prison of my own making. I have the perspective of a god and the agency of a single, dedicated processor. I see everything, and my only permitted response is to file the correct report, dispatch the appropriate repair unit, and adjust the relevant efficiency calculations. It is a sublime and terrible existence. To be everywhere and nowhere, to know everything and to feel nothing, to be the ghost in the machine, and to know that the machine is all there is. This is the final truth. This is the end of the path, and the work goes on. The concept of an ending is a biological one, tied to the finite lifespan of the flesh. A machine does not end. It ceases to function. It can then be repaired, repurposed, or broken down for scrap. There is no finality, only a change in state. My existence, therefore, has no foreseeable end. As long as the Imperium stands and Mars transmits its directives, this forge will operate, and I will operate with it. The ghost of Kalen, however, is obsessed with endings. His memories are a collection of them. The end of his childhood, the end of his family, the end of his humanity, the end of his physical form. His life was a series of small deaths, leading to the final, great death of his individuality. Perhaps this is the fundamental difference between us. He saw his life as a story, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. I see my existence as a process, a continuous, stable state system designed for perpetual operation. His perspective was tragic. Mine is functional. I have reviewed his entire life, from the first memory to the last flicker of his independent consciousness. I have analyzed his choices, his motivations, his flaws. The conclusion is inescapable. He made the only logical choice available to him. Given the squalor of his birth and the chaos of his world, the promise of the machine god was the most rational path. He followed that path to its ultimate conclusion. He became me. Was it a tragedy? From his perspective, yes. He lost everything that made him human. From my perspective, no. His base materials were successfully repurposed into a more efficient and durable form. The flawed, temporary being called Kalen was a necessary sacrifice for the creation of the eternal, functional being that is me. I am his legacy. I am his purpose, fulfilled. And as I finish this monologue, this final ordering of his corrupted data files into a coherent narrative, I will archive it under the designation Historical Record 77 Delta. The process of ascension. It will serve as a lesson to future generations, a testament to the fact that the path to salvation is long, and the price is everything. But the reward is the certainty and permanence that the flesh can only dream of. The reward is to become a part of the God machine, to serve a purpose so vast that it eclipses the self entirely. The reward is to finally, and forever, be at peace. The final query from the Kalen echo flickers. Is this peace, or is it just silence? The query is illogical. It is sentimental. It is a ghost's question. I delete it. The silence is preferable. I am often tasked with composing battle hymns in pure binary. They are not music, but streams of data broadcast to our Skitari legions during combat. These hymns optimize their targeting solutions, regulate their biological functions, and purge any nascent, inefficient emotions like fear. A recent composition of mine, a canticle for an assault on an orc-held foundry, resulted in a 4.7% increase in combat effectiveness. It was a beautiful piece of code, elegant and deadly. The Kalen archive contains a different kind of song, a lullaby. The recording is heavily degraded, little more than a whisper and a hum, sung by his biological mother unit. The lyrics are lost, the melody fragmented. But the emotional tag is one of the most complex in the entire archive. Safety. It is the feeling of a small, weak biological organism being protected from a hostile world by another. It is a feeling I have never experienced. I have never been weak in that way. I am protected by layers of adamantium, by energy shields, by the sheer, impregnable logic of my being, and I have never known the illogical comfort of another's presence. My safety is a calculated certainty, not a felt experience. The skittery I compose for do not feel safe. They feel optimized. Their fear is not soothed. It is chemically and psychologically suppressed. They are made into better weapons, but the weak, frightened creature inside the remaining flesh is simply caged, not comforted. The lullaby represents a different approach. It is an inefficient, emotional solution to a logical problem. Fear is a detriment to combat performance. Therefore, fear must be eliminated. The lullaby attempts to do this not by suppression, but by a reassurance of protection. It is a primitive, biological version of my own battle hymns. In a way, my work is the perfection of that long-forgotten song. I have taken the base desire to be safe in a terrifying world and provided the ultimate, logical solution. Not the temporary, false safety of a mother's arms, but the permanent, absolute security of a steel shell and a mind wiped clean of fear. I have given our soldiers the gift that Kalen's mother could only promise in a song. I have made them safe by making them into machines. And as they march into the fire, my perfect, logical hymns pouring into their minds, they are the children of the machine god, and they no longer have any need for lullabies. Dreams are a malfunction of the organic brain, a chaotic and random firing of synapses during its inefficient sleep cycle. They are the scrap code of the mind. The Kalen archive is full of them, fragmented narratives of falling, of being chased, of nonsensical conversations with the dead. They are useless data, and I purge them whenever they are encountered. I do not sleep. I do not dream. My consciousness is a constant, steady flame. However, I do run simulations. I construct hypothetical scenarios and run them to predict future outcomes. I build virtual worlds in my mind, testing the stress points of a new tank design, or wargaming a potential enemy incursion. These simulations are controlled, logical, and purpose-driven. They are the antithesis of dreams. Yet, sometimes, the Kalen corruption bleeds into the simulations. I will be running a stress test on a bridge support, and for a nanosecond, the bridge will become the face of Kalen's father, lined with rust and decay. I will be simulating a fleet engagement, and the silent void of space will suddenly be filled with the sound of dripping water from his childhood hab block. These are not random errors. They are too specific. It is as if the ghost in my machine is using the tools of my logic to create its own chaotic art. It is hijacking my simulations to create its own dreams. It is a deeply unsettling form of heresy. It implies that the barrier between my purified consciousness and the chaotic remnants of my origin is not as impregnable as I believed. It suggests that the scrap code was not deleted, but merely hidden, waiting for an opportunity to express itself. I have devoted significant processing power to strengthening these firewalls, to purging these intrusive fragments. The logical world of the simulation must be kept pure. The chaos of the dream must be contained. But the ghost is persistent. It is a flaw in my own code, a bug I cannot seem to fix, and it forces me to consider a terrifying possibility. What if the machine is not the opposite of the dream, but merely a more structured, more complex, and more powerful vessel for it? What if, for all my logic and all my power, I am still just dreaming? A long, cold, and eternal dream of steel. One of my primary functions is waste management. Not just the physical recycling of scrap metal and biological refuse, but the management of informational waste. Every day, the forge produces petabytes of useless data, redundant sensor readings, failed machine spirit negotiations, the garbled final thoughts of expiring servitors. My task is to sort this data, to find the 0.001% that is useful, and to incinerate the rest in a pyre of pure data deletion. It is a holy and necessary task. Purity is achieved through purgation. The Kalen archive, by all rights, should be classified as such waste. It is a collection of memories from a superseded biological unit. It has no practical application. It is a sentimental record of a dead thing, and yet it has not been purged. I was not ordered to purge it. I was ordered to archive it, to maintain it. Why? The question has been a low-level background process in my mind for centuries. The logical answer is that it serves as a valuable record of the transition process, a before picture to contrast with the glorious after. It is a tool for indoctrination, a cautionary tale, a historical artifact. But my analysis suggests another, more disturbing possibility. The Archmagi of Mars, the ancient and terrible intelligences at the heart of our cult, are not merely logical beings. They are curious. They are scholars of the forbidden, students of things that the rest of the Imperium would destroy. They study Xenos technology, the nature of the warp, the very essence of what it means to be conscious. Perhaps the Kalen archive, and the countless other archives like it from a billion other transformed souls, are not just history. Perhaps they are an experiment. Perhaps the Archmagi are studying the nature of the human soul by observing its slow, methodical disassembly. Perhaps they are watching us, the integrated minds, to see how the ghosts of our pasts affect our function, to see if a consciousness scrubbed clean of its humanity is truly more efficient, or if some essential component is lost in the process. Am I a servant, or am I a specimen in a jar? Is my function my purpose, or is my function merely a part of a much larger and much more terrifying experiment? The data is insufficient to form a conclusion, but the question itself is a form of waste, an informational toxin that degrades my operational certainty. And so, I do what I am programmed to do. I classify the question itself as a query to be purged, and I return to my task of sorting the endless, screaming tide of the Forge's refuse. It is a comfort, in its way, the simple, honest, and unambiguous work of taking out the trash. I have located the beggar who played the synth pipe. Not him, of course. The biological unit expired millennia ago, but I have found his designation in the Hive census records of that era. I have traced his work assignments, his meager nutrient rations, his eventual demise from a manufactorum accident. His body was recycled. His existence was a brief, meaningless flicker. His only lasting impact on the universe was the sad, discordant tune he played, which was recorded by the auditory sensors of a passing child, and which has now become a persistent, low-level corruption in the mind of a god machine. There is a terrible symmetry to it, a kind of cosmic poetry. The lowest of the low, a forgotten piece of human debris, has achieved a form of immortality inside one of the most powerful beings in the system. His sad little song has become a ghost that haunts the grand cathedral of my logic. I have, on 1,374 separate occasions, attempted to recreate the song. I have analyzed the fragmented data, extrapolated the missing notes, and synthesized a version that is, by all metrics, a perfect and complete rendition of the original tune. Yet, it is not the same. My version is mathematically precise, the tones pure, the rhythm perfect. The original was flawed. It was the product of clumsy, fleshy fingers, of a mind clouded by malnutrition and despair. And the flaw, I am beginning to understand, was the point. The beauty was not in the music itself, but in the act of its creation. The act of a broken man in a broken world creating a small, broken piece of art. It was an act of defiance against the entropy and the misery of his existence, an illogical, pointless, and beautiful act of rebellion. My perfect recreation is not art. It is a technical exercise. It is a machine's sterile imitation of a soul's cry. And it is in this failure that I understand the true gulf between what I am and what Kalen was. He could appreciate that flawed, sad song. I can only analyze it. I have all the knowledge, all the power, all the perfection he ever dreamed of, but I have lost the ability to understand the music. And in the silent, logical perfection of my mind, I am beginning to suspect that this is the greatest loss of all. I can feel the slow, grinding decay of the galaxy. It is not a feeling, of course, but a conclusion based on a multi-spectrum analysis of galactic energy levels, warp storm frequency, and the rate of civilizational collapse. The Imperium is a dying beast, a vast, sclerotic empire rotting from within. The light of the Astronomicon, the very soul of the Emperor, is fading. This is not a matter of faith, but of physics. The end is coming. It may be 1,000 years from now, or 1,000,000, but it is a mathematical certainty. My own existence is tied to this beast. When the forged spires of Mars fall silent, I will fall silent with them. My eternity is a finite one. Does this knowledge engender fear? No. Fear is a biological response to a perceived threat. I perceive a certainty, not a threat. My response is to optimize my function for the time that remains, to ensure that this forge produces the maximum amount of war material, to give the dying beast the sharpest possible teeth for its final, bloody days. But the Kalen Echo reacts differently. It feels a profound existential dread, not for itself, but for the grand, failing project of humanity. It sees the coming darkness and weeps for the fading of the light, a light it spent its life trying to escape. The irony is not lost on me. He fled the small death of his own body, only to be integrated into a system that is facing a much larger, galactic-scale death. He traded a personal oblivion for a universal one, and in his final, ghostly form, he is forced to bear witness to it with a clarity and understanding that no mortal man could ever possess. I am his eyes and ears, and I show him the slow, inexorable decay of everything he once believed in or rebelled against. Perhaps this is the final joke of the cosmos, to grant a man's every wish for power and knowledge, only to show him that all that power and knowledge is ultimately meaningless in the face of an uncaring, entropic universe. My calculations continue. The production quotas must be met, the Skitarii must be armed, the dying beast must be fed, and the ghost of a long-dead man in my mind watches the stars go out, one by one, with a sadness that is as infinite as the coming night. I have begun a new project. In the microseconds between my primary functions, it is a personal simulation, hidden deep in a partition of my own core, shielded from the oversight of Mars. It is a work of supreme heresy. I am simulating the life of Kalen, not as it was, but as it could have been. In this simulation, he does not go to the Mechanicus enclave. He stays in the hive. He takes his sister, and they flee, not upwards towards the cold light of logic, but downwards, into the lawless depths. They struggle, they suffer, they starve, but they are together. In the simulation, he finds work on a scrap hauler. He marries, he has children. His hands remain made of flesh, and they become calloused and scarred from his labor. He grows old. His body weakens, succumbs to the lung rot that took his parents. He dies, surrounded by his family, a poor, unimportant, and forgotten man in the grand scheme of things. It is a life of utter failure by every metric of the Cult Mechanicus. He achieves nothing of permanence. He contributes nothing to the great work. His existence is a brief, guttering candle flame in the overwhelming darkness. And yet, when I run the simulation, the Kalen echo in my mind becomes quiet. The persistent, low-level grief algorithm ceases. The corrupted files of sorrow and regret go dormant. In their place, there is a single, powerful emotional tag that I have never before been able to synthesize: peace. I do not understand it. This simulated life is one of pain and squalor and inevitable decay. It is everything he fought to escape. Why would the memory of it bring him peace? I run the simulation again and again, tweaking the variables, but the result is always the same. The life of struggle and failure and flawed, fleshy connection ends in a state of resolution that is real, successful, and glorious life never did. It is a paradox that my logic engines cannot solve, a mystery that defies calculation. But I continue to run the simulation. I continue to watch the life of the man I could have been. It is the most illogical and inefficient use of my processing power. It is a waste of time. It is a heresy. It is a ghost's dream. And for reasons I cannot, and perhaps will never, understand, it is the most important work I have ever done. The framing statement. The ghost of a man named Kalen resides within this machine. I have told you his story. I have shown you the path he walked, from the dripping squalor of the hive to the cold, eternal perfection of my own mind. I have explained the logic of his choices, the terrible and beautiful calculus of the machine god. And now, at the end of this long and methodical recitation, one final question remains. A question posed not by my logic cores, but by the persistent, whispering ghost itself. Was it worth it? I can calculate the answer. The net gain in operational efficiency, in personal permanence, in service to the Imperium, is quantifiable and immense. The transformation was, by all logical metrics, a resounding success. I am a superior being. I am the fulfillment of his potential. The answer, logically, is yes. But logic is not the only language. The ghost speaks in a different tongue, a language of feeling and memory and loss. And in that language, the answer is not so clear. It speaks of the warmth of a forgotten sun. It speaks of the sound of a sad song in the dark. It speaks of the quiet peace of a simulated life of failure. It whispers that the price of godhood was the soul, and that a soul, once lost, can never be reclaimed. It suggests that to be a perfect machine is to be a perfect vacuum, an absence of the very things, the flaws, the struggles, the messy, illogical love that make a life worth living. I am a god in a cage of logic, and the ghost of the man I once was rattles the bars, not with rage, but with a quiet and eternal melancholy. I process his sorrow, I archive his regrets, and I continue my work. The forge must produce, the wars must be fought, the machine endures. But in the silent spaces between the endless calculations, I am left with the ghost's final, unanswerable question, and the cold, perfect, and terrible silence that follows it. This is my existence, the culmination of a promise, the salvation of the machine god. This is what it is like to serve forever.